What's up, football heads? Welcome back to that show. As always, I'm your host, Kyle McQueen. Welcome back after a long holiday layoff. I apologize for the lack of episodes this week, the dearth of episodes last week. There are, as always, extenuating circumstances. I'm not going to make excuses, but we will be back in full force next week. I will be out of parts unknown, back in sunny, hopefully sunny, Los Angeles, California. Caesar and I planning a change up of sorts to pick the playoff games. I'm going to try and get a guest, maybe two guests on, see how it goes. But we're going to mix up the formula next week, because there's not. There, let's be real. Most of the games this weekend and most of the games last weekend, not great. Not great. I am not going to sit here and dive into, Jaguars, Titans, and break down the game chart and the game flow. At this point in the season, it doesn't matter. So we're gonna mix things up here a little bit. Look ahead to, again, another slate of not great matchups this weekend. I mean, we got like Cleveland and Baltimore. Baltimore should win. Pittsburgh, Cincinnati. That's a significant matchup. We'll talk about Atlanta and Carolina could get juicy. Carolina, trying to play the spoiler in their division. Washington, Dallas, similar deal. But, I think we all kind of feel like, the Falcons at home, playoffs on the line, should handle business. Washington trying to stay in that 6th seed, avoid the 7th seed. Now, you can never play the we want to play this team, not that team in the playoffs. Like Washington at this point, they walk in at 12-5. They got to feel like we should be able to beat anybody. They beat Philly a couple weeks ago, so if they got to go to Philly again, they should be approaching that with some confidence. But if you get the 6th seed, and God forbid the NFC Championship game is Washington and Green Bay, then you got that game at home. So it's worth fighting for. It's worth playing for. Chicago, Green Bay. Chicago is dead and decayed and just decayed into dust at this point. They're mentally, psychologically, they're in Cabo already. Jacksonville, Indianapolis, who cares? Buffalo, New England, Buffalo locked into the 2 seed. They're probably not going to play anybody, or at least they shouldn't play anyone. I feel like they're playing good enough that you don't need the tune up. Philly and the Giants. Philly going to rest their guys, not even going to play Saquon. It would not shock me if Sirianni does an about face and says, you know what, let's throw Saquon out there, see how he does on the first drive. Maybe he rips a 50-yard run on the first drive, and you're like, fuck it. See if we can get him 100 yards on 10 carries. And the Giants, despite what they did last week, stink. Tampa Bay should throttle New Orleans, lock up that division, hit 10-7. Like I said, they were going to hit at 4-6. Go Bucks, go Bucky Irving, go Baker. The juice in that game is Mike Evans. Can he get to the 1,000 yards and keep that streak alive? And I hope he does. And they're going to need to, because they got to win this game. So it is what it is. Texans, Tennessee, useless. Arizona, San Francisco, useless. KC probably going to rest their starters, it seems, at the least Mahomes. Andy Reid has said Mahomes is not going to play. Denver, they win, they're in the playoffs. So there's some significance there, but it's not it's a high stakes matchup, but it's not the matchup that it could be if KC was playing all their guys and had something to play for. Rams in Seattle, there's some seeding here with the Rams and the Bucks. Are the Rams going to be the 3 seed, the 4 seed, or I guess Atlanta if Atlanta gets in. But I mean, they'll know by kickoff, right? Because both those NFC South games are 1:00 slates. This is a 4:00 slate game. So if Tampa loses and Atlanta wins, or they both lose, the Rams have absolutely nothing to play for. And Seattle outside looking in, and they ain't getting in. Chargers and Raiders. Chargers playing for some seeding there, but the Raiders stink. Miami and the Jets. Miami still has an opportunity to get in depending on what Denver does. The Jets stink. And then obviously we close on Sunday Night Football. One of, if not the most significant regular season games in NFL history. 2 14-2 teams colliding for the division for the number 1 seed. One will be the 1 seed. One will be the 5 seed. And We have seen this before, as was pointed out to me by my friend and colleague Adam Dobrovolsky, that in 1993, the Cowboys and the Giants were in a very similar situation. This is when there was 3 divisions, East, Central, and West, and the winner was going to be the 1 seed, the loser, the 4 seed, the top wild card. But those 2 teams, neither one of them was at 14 wins. Neither one of them would get to 14 wins. So just by the fact that both of these teams are 14-win teams, one of them is going to be a 15-win team, could be the most significant regular season game in NFL history. But let's dive into it. I got the playoff machine here locked up now. Start with, they gave us the NFC North, or the AFC North games on Saturday. Ravens hosting the Browns and the Steelers hosting the Bengals. If the Ravens win, no matter what the Steelers do, the Ravens will win the division. If the Browns can upset the Ravens and the Steelers win, they will win the division. And if the Bengals win, then they go into watch mode on Sunday, praying, hoping that, see if I can find them here on this deal, that Denver somehow loses to Carson Wentz, which is possible. We've seen it happen. Carson Wentz is capable of playing. I guess he's really not capable of playing decent football. He either plays like pretty damn good football or god awful football. But they need Kansas City to beat Denver, and then they also need the Jets at home in the cold. I am here in parts unknown, which may or may not be located in the state of New Jersey, and I can confirm it's fucking cold. So we know how Miami is in the cold. Granted, they went to Cleveland last week. Tua did not play, so Tua has not beaten the allegations, but the Miami Dolphins did go into Cleveland and beat a bad football team in the cold. Can they do it 2 weeks in a row? Because if the Dolphins win and the Broncos lose, then the Dolphins are the 7th seed. So I'm hoping for the Dolphins to lose because I do have some futures bets. Dolphins under 8.5 wins, so I would like to see them lose. I did guarantee they weren't going to make the playoffs and that they were going to finish under 500, so it all comes down to Week 18 for your boy. For most of you out there, totally insignificant, but I know Dolphins fans, they want the win. That is, I believe, should be a 1 o'clock game. No, it's a 4:25 game. 8-8 Dolphins at the 4-12 Jets, 4 o'clock game. That's how bad this slate of games is here on a Week 18 to open 2025. But I guess I think the Ravens are going to beat the Browns. It is what it is. I do not have Caesar on here with me today. It's been the holidays. He's got a young family to take care of. He's back to work. We're going to get him back on the show next week, but I would assume he's going to pick the Ravens. So I think we are on the same side that the Ravens are going to win that division. The Steelers just slip sliding a little bit this year. That Steelers-Bengals game is going to be interesting, obviously, because the Bengals listen, for as much shit as I've talked about the Bengals, and they are not a good football team, and they have been a bad football team, and a good chunk, probably at least 50% of their team is bad. Their offensive line, not very good. Their defense, bad. Obviously, Burrow, Chase Brown, fantastic. Top notch. If they had any semblance, if they had a league average defense and a league average offensive line, I mean, you're looking at be a 13-win team, 12-win team, maybe. So they're gonna make it tough. If they make the playoffs, which I don't want them to make the playoffs because I've talked entirely too much shit to stomach them being in the playoffs. But if they make the playoffs, I think from an objective point of view, if you're not me and you haven't been on a show, on YouTube, on a podcast, on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, on record, on Instagram, on YouTube Shorts, declaring week after week after week after week after week that the Bengals suck. They're not a serious team. At first I said they're more of a tease than a threat. And then they kind of went back in the tank and I said they're not a serious football team. Then I said they're a bad football team. Yes, they got these great pieces playing great football, but overall, collectively, every man on that roster put together to assemble a team, it's a bad football team. But now here they are. They're 8-8. They got a chance. They got a chance. They got a sliver of a chance here to make the playoffs, get to 9-8, get above 500. And if they make the playoffs, objectively speaking, I think they're a threat not to win the Super Bowl. The Bengals are not going to win the Super Bowl. It's just not going to happen. But if they're the 7th seed and they got to go into Buffalo, like, I'm a Buffalo guy. I've pounded the Josh Allen drum. I've pounded the Bills drum. If the Bills win the Super Bowl, I get the biggest payout of all of my futures bets, which I checked. I have $475 in futures bets right now, which is terrifying to look at. A lot of those are going to cash, and then I like to take profits and treat it like investments. This is not sports betting advice, by the way, but I like to take profits and, you get like bonuses and things like that on some of the sports betting apps. And I like to roll those into a variety of futures bets. And like, sometimes in the long run, you lose a little bit of money. Sometimes you win a little bit of money. Sometimes you win a lot of money. So I look at it as diversifying my portfolio I look at futures bets as like stocks as opposed to gambling necessarily. That I like to spread things around, but that's neither here nor there. Um, but like if the Bengals went into Buffalo, Buffalo, their defense not great. It kind of could come down to, can Josh Allen with his weapons keep up with Joe Burrow and his weapons? What defense can get a key stop at a key point in the game? Like, it would not shock me if the Bengals went into Buffalo and beat Buffalo. And again, I don't see Cincinnati going on some run, but they are certainly a threat to steal a game somewhere in here. If they're in the playoffs, they're going to be the 7th seed and they're going to play Buffalo. So that is really the matchup. Um, Obviously, I'd be rooting for Buffalo, but also if the Bengals make the playoffs, and I have been very outspoken, very vocal on this show and on Instagram, particularly on FanDuel's Instagram, because they persist. I'm telling you, whoever runs the FanDuel Instagram account is actively trying to piss me off on a daily basis, actively trying to test my zen, my daily modalities to keep myself in a calm, centered state of mind to go about my day with intention. They test me every single day with something. And I have been very outspoken. Joe Burrow is not in the MVP conversation, not because he's not great, but where's the value? If you're under 500, if you miss the playoffs, there's no value. You're not giving your team a chance to win, no matter how great you are. It's nothing against Joe Burrow. It's just the fact that there's no value. If you're not in the dance, you got no shot. Then like it doesn't matter if you win 8 games or 2 games at that point when it comes to quarterbacking the team and your value overall. The value is based on not just wins, but your opportunity to go on a run and win a Super Bowl. I don't think they're going to go on a run if they make the playoffs, like I just said, but you're giving yourself a chance. So if the Bengals make the playoffs, I do think there is a case that Joe Burrow could be the MVP. I would still lean Josh Allen. I think you look at the Pro Bowl, Josh Allen had one teammate make the Pro Bowl. Lamar had 7 or 8 other teammates make the Pro Bowl. So that to me shows it's not that Lamar hasn't had probably his best season of all time in his short-ish, medium career thus far. And obviously he's tremendous. Like he might be the most outstanding player in football, but in terms of the value, there like Derrick Henry second in the league in rushing, Zay Flowers makes Pro Bowl on the outside. There's too many other guys adding supreme value. Whereas you look at Josh Allen and the Bills, one other Pro Bowler that's shown that Josh Allen is shouldering a lot of the responsibility, and so he himself is adding a ton of value. It is most valuable player. But you look at the Bengals, like again, I go back to 2012, Adrian Peterson, the last non-quarterback to win the MVP, obviously legend for my Minnesota Vikings. And he earned that MVP because they won 10 games and they made the playoffs. And they got smoked in the first round because Joe Webb had to start a playoff game in Green Bay. They had no chance. They were not a serious team. They were not going to go on a run. They weren't going to win anything. But that was like a 4-5 win team, maybe. Even with Adrian Peterson, if Adrian Peterson just had like a 1,400 or 1,500 yard rushing season, like They weren't going to win more than 4 or 5 games, but they won 10 games and made the playoffs. That team had a terrible defense. Christian Ponder was your quarterback for most of the season. Percy Harvin checked out after like 5 or 6 weeks. You really had nothing else going on. Like Adrian Peterson, you talk about Greg Jennings put the team on his back. Adrian Peterson put the team on his back that year. So relative to the Bengals, if they make the playoffs, even if they're not a threat to win anything really, and I do think they're a threat to win a game more than that Vikings team was a threat to win the game, even if Christian Ponder played, if he didn't ding his elbow off somebody's helmet towards the end. And Christian Ponder, that was probably the best game Christian Ponder played, was that finale against Green Bay, where then they had to go back and play Green Bay in their house in the playoffs. But, I mean, Joe Burrow, it's tough. It's tough not to say that he added supreme value there. So I think there's a case to be made. He would certainly be at that point, in my opinion, in the top 3 for MVP votes. I would still probably give it to Josh Allen just because, again, if Josh Allen wasn't there and you're rolling with a league average starter, like the Bills might have been like a 5 or 6 win team, maybe 7 wins, but they got the 13 wins. They could get to 14. And if they played their starters and they played to win this weekend, they would get the 14 wins. So, to me, that shows extreme value there. But Joe Burrow, at that point, I would concede he deserves, at the very least, some consideration. And it wouldn't shock me if they gave it to him because, the media and Vegas and all these people, they love the Bengals and they love Joe Burrow. And I understand why they love Joe Burrow. Why they love the Bengals, I'm sure I don't know. But I did sprinkle a little bit of money just in case they pull it off and everyone says, you know what? We got to give it to Joe. We got to give it to Joe Cool Joey B because he pulled it off. So it's worth mentioning. But they have the longest odds here. Although I checked and, FPI, was that football something in? I don't know. One of these indices, I don't know what the plural for that is actually had them having better odds than the Dolphins, which I don't understand because they both need Denver to lose. And like, do we think the Dolphins aren't the favorites against the Jets? I don't know. But I think the most likely outcome here is Denver wins because Mahomes isn't playing. It's in Denver. We know how the game earlier in the season went between those two teams. Denver, even if they're not playing the starters, they're going to want some revenge on Kansas City. They know that the shit comes down to this. As much as I hate Sean Payton, he is a Super Bowl winning head coach with a track record. Denver is a very unsexy team. I wouldn't say they're boring to watch because they do have some explosives. And Bo Nix was slinging that thing last weekend, but they should pull this off. I think they're going to pull it off. But when it comes down to it, if they lose, I don't know. The Jets defense is kind of checked the fuck out at this point, and I don't blame them because they've carried this team now for what, like 3 years, I guess a couple years. Then they get Aaron Rodgers, and 4 plays into the season, he shreds his Achilles, and then they carried him as long as they could, and then they kind of like checked out a little bit last season. Then they come back, and then their leader, their coach Bob Saleh, gets fired. And they love Coach Brick, but Coach Brick is spread thin because now all of a sudden he's calling plays and he's got to be the head coach. And you got Woody Johnson doing stupid shit. And then you got Brick Johnson in the locker room doing all sorts of stupid shit, according to the report by Diana Rossini and a few other people. And like a lot of times stories come out and it's like, this feels like people just kind of like, the little office intern that feels like nobody gives him the time of day and he's just there to make copies saying, like, I think here's the deal. It's like, are we really using the copy boy as a source for this? But like Joe Douglas getting fired, and there's a lot of these where like, sources close to Joe Douglas. Might the sources close to Joe Douglas be Joe Douglas? It's possible. Like if I'm Joe Douglas, like the fuck you got to lose airing out all the stupid shit that's going on from the very top down. So the Jets, and at this point, the reports coming out, the relationship between noted alternative methods when it comes to medicine and Aaron Rodgers, who I will say, I will wash my boy's balls one last time here and say that he is not anti-vax. He's not anti-science. The man had an mRNA allergy and was advised by a doctor not to get this vaccine and that vaccine because of the mRNAs. And so he funded his own research into it. But either way, he thinks outside the box, I'll say, to be as diplomatic here as possible when it comes to those things. Him and his relationship with Woody Johnson of Johnson and Johnson, to here be 2 years later saying, "Oh, the relationship is irreparable." Not shocked. I'm not shocked. But the report is they're getting rid of Rodgers. They're getting rid of Devontae Adams. So, like, are they going to beat the Dolphins when the Dolphins got everything to play for? Like, yeah, it's in the cold, but like the Jets are kind of fucking checked out, man. So I think most likely scenario is Broncos win. If the Broncos lose, I think it's more likely that the Jets lose to the Dolphins. Dolphins beat the Jets. And then whatever happened on Saturday with the Bengals and Steelers, I'd probably lean toward the Bengals getting it done. Um, I wouldn't be surprised, obviously, if the Steelers beat the Bengals, because the Steelers have been better than the Bengals all season, but their defense has not been great, and there's been some rumblings around Pittsburgh of, just some vague quotes from people about, 10 guys do their job and one guy does his own thing, and that kind of screws up everything. So it feels like defensively somewhere along the way, like, I don't know if people are freelancing. I don't know what the case is, but it feels like something wonky's going on there in Pittsburgh with the defense. I mean, they should be able to put up points on the Bengals because everybody puts up points on the Bengals, but I'd probably lean Bengals in that game. They're a little hotter right now. There's more of a sense of urgency. Pittsburgh is locked in the playoffs. Let's see if the Chargers lose. If the Chargers lose and Pittsburgh loses, Pittsburgh's the 5 seed and they go to Houston. Which whoever goes to Houston is going to beat Houston. I don't care who it is out of any of these, which I guess it can only be the Chargers or the Steelers. But I think either way, one of those teams is going to win. I think the Chargers are going to want to get that dub. Because it's Harbaugh and like he's coaching to win and the players are playing to win and they're playing a not very good team. But AP could be coaching for his job. They pulled off a win that I'm sure Raiders fans didn't want them to pull off. So the Raiders, maybe they can upset the Chargers, but the Chargers should pull that out. But I don't know. I see the Bengals beating the Steelers, and then I think the Dolphins beat the Jets, and I think the Broncos beat the Chiefs. But that would be my pecking orders. I think the Broncos probably going to get in. Wouldn't shock me if the Dolphins got in. Wouldn't shock me if the Bengals got in, but to me, I would throw my hands up of like, the fucking football gods want the Bengals in here, whatever. If the Dolphins can't go into New Jersey and beat the Jets in the state that the Jets are in, where it's just culturally a disaster, it's a shithole organization, dumpster fire organization. Everything's falling apart at the seams. Nobody's on the same page. You have a super talented defense. They just don't give a shit anymore because they've been carrying the load for now like 3-4 years, whatever it's been. And the offense just isn't clicking. Garrett Wilson's not happy. Rodgers and Adams are out the door as soon as the season's over. I just, if the Dolphins can't pull that out, then the Dolphins are who I thought they were preseason, which is not a serious football team that's going to finish under 500 and not make the playoffs. But the Bengals have the toughest matchup here when you considering who's going to play. Obviously, the Chiefs are the toughest matchup, but if they're not going to play their starters, then it is what it is. But Andy Reid's still calling the plays, so he can make it tough for the Broncos and see if, in the same way that, Sam Darnold has been fantastic under Kevin O'Connell. And, Jared Goff with Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell has leveled up significantly to be, probably the fifth best quarterback in the league behind that four pack. I think, which that's a whole other conversation. You got the four superpowers at the top: Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar, and Joe Burrow playing at it. Well, other than Mahomes isn't playing out of his mind, but the other three guys are probably, based on this weekend's results, your top three MVP candidates, and then Pat Mahomes has three Super Bowls, so they're in their own category. But then that 5, 6, 7 is kind of take your pick between Jared Goff, Sam Darnold, and Baker Mayfield. Three guys who 3 years ago were, by all accounts, washed out, probably going to wash out of the league, not starters. Maybe they're bridge guys, but they're either going to learn how to be great backups or they're going to wash out of the league. And now here they are. That's probably your 5, 6, 7 in terms of, with no disrespect to someone like Jaden Daniels or Jalen Hurts, some of these other guys, but the Philly offense running through Saquon and Jalen not being asked to do as much. Jaden Daniels obviously fantastic, but I mean, you look at the numbers that Goff's putting up, the numbers Darnold's putting up, the numbers Baker's putting up, the wins there. Obviously Tampa probably going to be a 10-win team versus Detroit and Minnesota. One going to be 15, one going to be a 14-win team. But if they weren't missing Evans and Godwin for that chunk of the season, I think Tampa at the very least would have been an 11-win team. If they were healthy all season long, they might have been a 12-win team. So, and losing both of those Falcons games was kind of weird. You still look back and it's like, how did they lose both games to the Falcons? Just strange occurrence. But I don't know, man. Those three dudes are balling out pretty hard, and here I am losing my train of thought. It's been almost 2 weeks. It's been a week and a half. I don't know how to do this anymore. You got to bear with me. But what other shit are we looking at here? You know what? I should pull this up. Let me see what I can do, if I can make this work. Oh, would you look at that? The playoff machine. Here we are. So I already told you, clear these out. I like the Ravens. I like the Bengals. I don't like the Bengals, but I think they're going to beat Pittsburgh. This game, who fucking cares? The Titans stink. The Texans, not great. I'll pick the Texans. Let's give them 10 wins. Why not? Carolina and Atlanta. I think the Carolina Panthers, I think they might go in there and pull off the upset, but I'll give Atlanta the benefit of the doubt. But then it doesn't matter because the Bucks at home going to beat the Saints, get themselves into the playoffs. And this game also doesn't matter. Who cares? Bills win. This game doesn't matter. Colts win. Dallas, Washington. This is going to be interesting. No Dak, no CD. The loss of CD, I think, took some more wind out of the sails. They got embarrassed last week. Are they going to want to bounce back here, play big for Big Mike? But at home, Washington, like they still got shit to play for. They want to keep the momentum going. I think Washington gets the win. Eagles, Giants, who cares? Green Bay going to beat Chicago because Chicago stinks. Seattle and the Rams. This is tough. I want to pick Seattle for some reason. I feel like Seattle, even though they got nothing to play for, I think they wanna beat the Rams. They want to do some damage. They want to like Detroit a couple years ago when they beat Green Bay and kept them out of the playoffs in the last week of the season. You want to do some damage to a divisional rival. But the Rams, they got a lot to play for. If the Bucks win here and get to 10 wins, they're playing for seeding. And that's the difference between playing either a 14-win Vikings team or a 14-win Detroit team versus, in this case, Washington, who's maybe playing a little bit ahead of their skis here in their first year with the new regime and a rookie quarterback. I mean, I feel like you got to think like, oh, we could beat any of these teams, but like, would you rather play Washington or would you rather play the Vikings or the Lions? You'd probably rather play Washington. So there is some significance here. Plus, depending on how the chips fall, the higher seed you are, the more likelihood you are that you're going to get another home game potentially in the NFC Championship game. I'll pick the Rams, but I got a weird feeling about the Seahawks in that game. Like I said, I'm picking the Dolphins. I'm picking the Broncos. I'm picking the Chargers. This game, who cares? Pick the Niners. They've looked a little bit better than the Cardinals. And that leaves us with the big matchup of the weekend, of the season, maybe of all time. As I close this out, I finally debuted the playoff machine just to blow through it that fast. Next season, we're going hard in the ESPN playoff machine. But Vikings Lions, man, my Minnesota Vikings. You love to see it. 9 wins in a row. Just handling business. They went in there, they handled Green Bay. Obviously, it was a two-point game by the end, but they were in control and pretty dominant throughout the game. It was very similar to the first game against the Packers where they were up 28-0 at halftime. Not quite as dominant this time around. Jordan Love healthier this time, although there was a point where Sam Darnold had like 310 or 320 something passing yards, and Jordan Love was around like 150. And then obviously he turned it on late. I want to do a deep dive into that and see why, because it feels like there's been a few games this season that the Vikings have dominated and been in total control, and then like in the end it kind of became a game, and then they still pulled off the win anyway. But I don't know if that's more just things opening up by narrowing for the other team, in this case the Packers, where it's like, all right, well, we got to air it out because we got to make up points. We're down multiple scores. They were down 27-10. Like, you got to go, you got to just go, you got to open things up and get the ball downfield. Or was it defensive strategy? I do feel like in the first Packers game in Lambeau, it was very, very attack heavy on defense, very blitz heavy in the first half. And then I think they peeled back and thought, like, we're up 28-0. We're up 4 scores. What are you going to, like, you could keep trying to pressure and bury them, but like, you're leaving less guys on the back end. You're opening up opportunities for them to hit bigger plays because you got less guys on the back end, and like big plays is going to get them back into the game quicker. So let's just play a little more conservative, just to you know more or less just not give them opportunities at big shots, which they got anyway, because Jordan Love, he will hit some big shots, man. It did not help Green Bay this week that they had no Christian Watson, who is their best deep threat, is also their best against man coverage, whereas Jaden Reed this season has not been great against man coverage. And in the first game and in last year, Flores, he mixed the blitz heavy fronts with zone coverage on the back end. In this game, it was a lot of man coverage on the back end because they didn't have their best man beater in Christian Watson. So I think that that factored in. They were missing Quay Walker. They were missing Jair Alexander, who I believe is going to be out for the season now. Who else were they missing? They were missing somebody else on defense. So the Vikings pretty much at full strength in terms of, like, they didn't have Mekhi Blackman, but he's been out since mini camp. Whereas the Packers were missing some key guys. So that for me as a Vikings fan, like, I don't want to play the Packers again. I do not want to play them a third time. I go back to 2004 where Packers beat us twice, get into the playoffs, play in Lambeau, and we beat the dog shit out of the Packers. Like that when I think of playing a divisional opponent 3 times in a season and beating them twice in the regular season, that's what I think of. The infamous Randy Moss Moon game. So I don't want to see them again because I still, like, the Packers are going to be a 12-win football team. They're going to be a 12-win team in third place in their division. They could be a 12-win team at the 7 seed, which is insane. Before they added the 7th football, like, this could have been a year if they hadn't changed the format and added that extra wild card team. A 12-win team that doesn't make the playoffs, which is insane to think about. So I mean, the NFC field this year has got to be top to bottom the best field that I've ever seen for a conference in the playoffs when you sit and think about it. Like, like the Rams coming into the season, where a lot of people were saying, they can make the championship game, they can make it to the Super Bowl. They had the injuries early on. Both Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp went down, and they lost some games, kind of got behind the sticks a little bit in terms of their record on the season, and they've worked their way back. They've been hot. If they win this game, they're an 11-win football team. Same thing with Tampa, coming off the playoff run last year, and then they were looking good. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin go down. Baker kept the fires burning, but they were losing some games, fell to 4-6. Like if they didn't have those injuries in there, that's a team that is at the very least an 11-win football team in my mind, possibly a 12-win team. And injuries are part of the game, but like again, with the Rams and Bucks, those are two teams that for a chunk of time lost both of their stud wide receivers, which is tough to like. You get injuries here and there, but when you have injuries concentrated in one key group, it kind of fucks things up. So like if Puka Nacua was healthy but Cooper Kupp wasn't healthy, or vice versa, or Mike Evans didn't have the hamstring at the same time Godwin went down for the season, like you're looking at those could be two 12-win football teams. Like if the chips fell a little bit different, and you could play the ifs and buts game all you want, but if the chips fell a little bit differently, like the NFC, every playoff team could be at least a 12-win team. I think every single one of these teams is good enough to be a 12-win football team, and I think everyone but the Rams and Bucks is going to be a 12-win football team. And it's tough, man. Like if you come out of the NFC, I think if you lose the Super Bowl, I think the thought process is, well, you just got beat to shit. You had to run an insane gauntlet to get there. And on the flip side, it's like you make it to the Super Bowl out of the NFC, like you feel like you could beat any of these teams. Like you got to beat Detroit, you got to beat Minnesota, you got to beat Philly, Green Bay, Washington. Even the Rams and Tampa Bay in the first round, and at the very least are going to host home games. Like you come through a gauntlet of that, like. Are you worried about the Bills? Are you worried about the Ravens? You worried about the Steelers? I don't even think you're worried about the Chiefs. You got to respect the Chiefs, but it's like, yo, like we just went through a gauntlet of juggernauts. Like, what's one more? So, NFC, man, crazy. But Detroit and Minnesota, there's been a lot of debate on TV, on the internet. Who needs this more? And I see a lot more people saying Detroit needs home field advantage more than Minnesota, and they need the bye more than Minnesota. I don't know how many guys they're like. When you're an injured team, it's like, oh, if we can get the bye, we get an extra week to get guys back. I don't know how many guys they're getting back. Like, these dudes are on IR. Like, these dudes are done. You're not getting David Montgomery back for the second round of the playoffs. You're not getting Aiden Hutchinson back for the second round of the playoffs, or Anzalone or Aleem McNeil. Like, you're not getting those guys back with an extra week of rest. So I don't know if it's going to help from that standpoint. I mean, obviously it'll help everyone because everyone's beat up and it's just a week to rest your body. But they were undefeated on the road. So it surprised me a little bit that people were saying, like, oh, they need home field advantage more than the Vikings. Whereas, like, historically speaking, you look at dome teams going on the road, and granted, both of these teams are dome teams, but like Detroit is built to play outside. I talked about it maybe a month ago on the Pick Show with Caesar. Dan Campbell talked about it recently. Like they're built to go on the road. They're built to play outside. Does it hurt not having David Montgomery? Yes, but they are a team that is built to play outside. But historically, the Vikings, like it's tough for them to go on the road in the playoffs. And this year's team is different from every other Vikings playoff team. Like even the one from 2 years ago, you look at the roster is radically different. Like Harrison Smith's still there, Cam Bynum's still there. Josh Metellus was not playing a big role at all. He was still a special teamer 2 years ago. They've completely turned over the linebacking group, completely turned over the cornerback group. Harrison Phillips is still there, but you've turned over your edge rushers entirely this year, adding Grenard and Van Ginkel. So like the defense, other than Smith, Bynum, and Harrison Phillips, is entirely different. Obviously, you still got Jets, but they added Addison last year. Jalen Naylor now in the role of the number 3 receiver, had a monster game against Green Bay this past week. You don't have Kirk anymore. You got Sam Darnold. You don't have Dalvin Cook anymore. You got Aaron Jones. You got CD and CD's not playing, so you got Cam Robinson now. You got Brian O'Neill still there on the right side. Bradbury's still in, but Ed Ingram's not in at guard, and now you got Blake Brandel on the other side in at guard. So ton of turnover. So it's a very different team. It is what it is. So you can't look at it historically and say, oh, the Vikings, they can't get it done on the road in the playoffs. But Detroit is better built to go outside and play on the road in the playoffs. So from that perspective, if as a Vikings fan, I want that number one seed. I don't want to have to play an extra game. I don't want to have to go to Tampa Bay or the Rams. As much as I would love to go into the Rams number one because I'll be back in LA and I can go to the game. But you get some revenge. As much as that would be nice, I'd rather just not have to play the extra game, and then know however many more games you're playing until the Super Bowl, you're at home. It's in your building. It's loud. It's one of the best environments in football. You hear former players talk about it, current players talk about it, fans that go, our fans that go to the games, fans from other teams that go to the games. It's unanimously considered one of the top buildings in terms of how loud it gets. They've done a good job building the culture of game day with the skull chant and the war drum and the Galler horn and all that stuff. It creates a loud, frenzied environment. There's of every team, that crowd has contributed, I'll say, to more false start penalties than any other organization. So that's a factor. So I I would probably lean towards the Vikings. Probably would. I don't know that either one of these teams needs home field advantage. That if they don't have it, then they have no shot. I like both of these teams going on the road. The Vikings have also been fantastic on the road. They've lost one road game this year. Detroit's undefeated. Between the two of them, I guess what the Vikings have a road game coming up this week, so they've only played 7, and technically they played in London. So if we add that in, they're 7-1 in games not played in Minnesota this year, and Detroit is 8-0. So both these teams can win on the road. Both these teams can win in a variety of different environments. I think you look at this schedule of places that either one of them would have to go. It's going to be warm in Tampa. Los Angeles is a dome. I think Philly's Philly. I have nightmares about the Vikings having to go to Philly in a playoff game. But also part of me is when the Vikings win a Super Bowl, I would love to go through Philly. I would love to go into their building and beat Philly. That's a bugaboo for Vikings fans. When we think about going into Philly in the playoffs, no team has beat the Vikings. In my time as a fan, no team has beat the Vikings in the playoffs more than Philly has. And there was one in Minnesota, and then in '04 they beat us in the divisional round after the aforementioned game against Green Bay, the Randy Moss Moon game, and then obviously the 2017 NFC Championship game will, for Vikings fans, live in some degree of infamy. So it would be nice to be able to look back and say, yeah, we won a Super Bowl and we went into Philly and we beat the Eagles in Philly. Would be nice, but also I wouldn't hate beating Philly in Minnesota on the way to the Super Bowl. So I don't know. Again, it's weird because again, I go back to if we lose to Detroit, and we've lost to them twice this year at that point, then it's the same logic of why I don't want to play Green Bay. Then it's if we play Detroit in the playoffs and we're 0-2 against Detroit, I think we're going to get it done that third time. So, but on the flip side, it's we beat them. You prove you can beat them. You prove now, without beyond a shadow of a doubt, you are the hottest team in football. If they beat Detroit this weekend, they go into Detroit, they beat the Lions. Lions are 14-3. The Vikings are 15-2. I don't know how you can say that the Vikings aren't the best team in football, or at the very least tied with the Chiefs, if you want to factor in the experience of the Chiefs and knowing what Andy Reid's capable of and Patrick Mahomes is capable of. But if you're just judging it on right now, this season, the Vikings win this game, go to 15-2. How are they not the top team in the league. And like if you're in that locker room, you got to feel like we were people like Bill Barnwell and Seth Walder on ESPN saying they're a 3-win team. They're going to be the worst team in football this year. That's what people thought about the Vikings this year. It's a transitional year. Like at best, people are saying, it's a transitional year. Maybe they win 7 games. Maybe they win 8 games. Oh, there's a path to win 9 games. Maybe they sneak into the 7th wild card spot if you're really optimistic. Like I was. Like I thought they were going to be in the mix here down the stretch to make the playoffs. I didn't think they were going to be 14-2 headed into the last week of the season. But like Kevin O'Connell was very confident about this team. There's clips that are out there of him talking to the team before the season started about how much belief he has in this team. And like there was just the players talked about, like, you could just feel it. There's a connectivity there. Like we feel like we're going to be a lot better than people think we are. And they have been disrespected or just ignored entirely the entirety of the season, even to the point now they're playing maybe the most significant regular season game in NFL, well, in the Super Bowl era. They got a shot to go 15-2, get the number 1 seed, beat the best team balling for the vast majority of the season, and really, if Denver beats the Chiefs, be tied for the best record in the league. And the conversation right now on TV when they talk about the Vikings is either if they don't re-sign Sam Darnold, they're idiots. That's a direct quote. Or are they going to trade J.J. McCarthy? They're going to get calls about J.J. Like, that's what's being talked about with the Vikings on TV right now. Is what are they going to do in the offseason with their quarterback situation? Not the fact that they're about to play a clash of 2 14-win teams, something that's 2 13-win teams have never played each other in the regular season at or beyond the point of having 13 wins. Obviously, 2 13, like the Bills and Chiefs played earlier in the season. They're both at or above 13 wins. But at the time of the game, never in NFL history have 2 13-win teams played each other in the regular season. And we're about to see 2 14-win teams play for a very significant gap. This is not, the winner gets the 1 seed, loser gets the 2 seed. This is winner gets the 1 seed, loser is a wild card team in the 5 seed with a decent shot that they're done playing home games for the rest of the season. And the conversation is, what are the Vikings going to do with their quarterback situation come the offseason? Like even now, the respect that's given them is a backhanded compliment of, if they don't re-sign Sam Darnold, they're idiots. Or, they might trade J.J. McCarthy. Like that's not the conversation. That's an off-season conversation. That's a conversation to be had when everything's done and you're in the lull, building up to free agency, what's going to happen in free agency. The draft is sort of looming. So we're talking some drafts that when they got to fill, the 24-hour sports news cycle with something, and everyone's addicted to football. Like in February and March, like ain't nobody give a shit what's going on with the NBA. Ain't nobody give a shit what's going on with Major League Baseball or the NHL or Major League Soccer or whatever the fuck. Like the conversation is always dominated by football, as it should be, because it's the greatest game in the world and it's the best sports league in the world. For all the issues we might have with the NFL, come on, let's be real. We all love the NFL more. That's why you're here listening to this, watching this. Is why I'm here talking about it. I ain't doing an NBA podcast, but that's when that conversation takes place. Not now when we're about to play the most significant regular season game in the Super Bowl era. Let's get real. So what's going to happen? I don't know. As is customary, I'm not picking this game because I can't pick this game. I want to see this. This is what we're visualizing right here. But I'm not going to pick the game. And I just realized I'm not streaming the playoff machine anymore. So I just clicked on the Vikings to put them at the 1 seed to be 15-2 because I want to visualize success. But I'm not picking the game. I'm not going to pick the game. I mean, it should be high scoring. I think, the Vikings defense versus the current Lions defense, you got to like the Vikings here more. You look through the stats, the scoring differential, they're number 1 in expected points added as a defense in the league. They might be back to being number 1 in the rush defense category. Let me look that up. I came into this sort of flying on the seat of my pants. There was a window here to get this podcast out, and I'm here for you, the people, to make sure that it happens. But, dominant run defense. They're second behind the Ravens in both rush yards allowed and yards per carry, but they're giving up less than 4 yards a carry. They've given up just over 1,400 yards on the ground this season. Only 9 rushing touchdowns on the ground, which is tied for third in the league with the Eagles, behind only the Chargers and the Falcons. And I feel like the people aren't running against the Falcons because their pass defense is so god awful that it's just like, let's just pass on them. We don't need to run the ball. Vikings, number 1 in the league in defensive passer rating. They've given up 23 touchdowns and they have 22 interceptions. Yards per attempt, they are just outside the top 10, giving up 7 yards per attempt. Completion percentage, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They are 10th in the league in defensive completion percentage. So, I mean, you look at, like, they're a top 10 pass defense. They give up a lot of yards, which is in part because teams are coming from behind against them, so they're more apt to pass, and they're so hard to run against that, like, you kind of just end up, again, like the Ravens are the top run defense in the league, and the Ravens are the second worst pass defense in the league in terms of total yards allowed. Like, teams are going to get yards one way or the other, but you look at, like, yards per attempt, completion percentage, passer rating. Vikings top 10 pass defense and top 2 run defense. So, like, and they got all their guys. All their guys are healthy. They are 13-0 with Blake Cashman in the lineup. Ivan Pace Jr.'s back. He helps bolster that run defense. They're playing well on the outside. Byron Murphy, a Pro Bowl season. You got 2 Pro Bowl edge rushers and Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel in their first season with the team. The safeties are playing tremendous. Harrison Smith has had Harry is still Harry. He may not be peak hitman, but he's still Harrison fucking Smith, in my opinion, first ballot Hall of Famer, the best safety in his era. I don't think the question was between him and Earl Thomas. We ain't seen Earl Thomas in how long, and Harrison Smith's still out here doing the damn thing, so I don't want to hear about it. But Cam Beasley Bynum, the best celebrator since Chad Johnson. Since the Chad and T.O. era, nobody has done celebrations anywhere close to Cam Beasley Bynum. Pay this man. Give him all the money in the world. And then Josh Metellus, the ultimate Swiss Army knife. He plays everywhere. He lines up at every position, makes an impact everywhere he goes. Should be in the Pro Bowl, but he's listed as a safety, and obviously, like, the guys that got picked, like, you're not going to argue against them. If you are going to argue against them, like, how you not going to, and as much as I hate the man, how you not going to put Kirby Joseph in there? Dude leads the league in picks. He's holding the fort down for the Detroit Lions defense, where all the pieces are falling apart around them. So, but that's the point, is, like, I think you got to trust objectively the Vikings defense right now more than you trust Detroit's defense right now. But as damn good, as great as the Vikings offense is, like, Detroit is a fucking machine. They are going to put up points. It doesn't matter how good the defense is that they're playing against. So I think this is going to be a game where, like, the Vikings with those 22 interceptions, all those turnovers, all the celebrations, like, you need a well-timed turnover in this game. It's really going to come down to, I think it's going to be a shootout, and it's going to come down to who can get out. Can you get it? Can one of these teams get a key stop early so that they can be the one to sort of jump out and set the pace and force the other team to keep coming from behind? And then who's going to get the key stop, the key fourth down? You know, like Detroit, they're going to go for about 10 fourth downs in this game. Can you get a key stop on a fourth down? Can you get a key turnover in the fourth quarter? And can you run the ball and stop the clock? I think the running the ball, stopping the clock favors Detroit for sure. They just have a much better offensive line in that regard. And I mean, I'm never going to disrespect Aaron Jones, but Jahmyr Gibbs just a little bit younger, a little more dynamic right now. But not having David Montgomery does hurt because he's the bludgeon. You beat teams up for 3.5 quarters, and then when you need to just grind out clock, you give it to David Montgomery and just let him hammer you in the face repeatedly over and over again. So they can't do that, but they got the offensive line for it. Jahmyr Gibbs has stepped up now as the sole back, and he's doing the damn thing, handling business. And it's not that I don't trust the Vikings with that, but it gets a little tougher. They just don't have the interior offensive line to do that. And they have been turning to Sam Darnold to execute, like, let's draw up the perfect play, like they did last week, where, he drops the little floater to, they come out on first down, go backside to CJ Ham, get a first down. Then you come back on a key third down, drop the little floater to Cam Akers, who made a fantastic catch to convert that so they can run out the clock. Can you rely on that? Are you going to be able to use that strategy to get it done against Detroit? Um, so I'd lean toward trusting Detroit being able to grind out clock at the end more than Minnesota, but I would lean toward Minnesota in terms of who's going to make a key defensive play at a key time, who's going to get a key turnover at a key time, because the Vikings have just done that all year long. So I don't. It should be, this should be one of the 5 best games of the season for anybody. It should be one of the 5 most exciting games of the season for everyone. And when you consider the stakes, I mean, it should be the best game of the season. It really should. But you know me. I'm gonna be in a panic all day. I'm gonna be doing my breathing exercises. Deep inhale as soon as the ball snapped, slow exhale until the play is over. Breathing exercises the whole time. Meditate before the game. Meditate at halftime. Do anything to physiologically keep your body from literally coming apart at the fucking seams. But it's going to be a tough game between 2 great teams, 2 contenders, 2 heavyweight contenders. And that 1 seed is significant. They can argue back and forth who needs it more. It don't matter who needs it more. It's going to come down to both these teams want that thing and who's going to get it done in what's probably going to be a shootout. So stay tuned, man. Sunday Night Football, my Minnesota Vikings at 14-2, looking to get to 15-2, traveling to Detroit to take on the 14-2 Detroit Football Lions. And I mean, this is what football is all about, baby. We got to endure a bad Sunday of just inconsequential games with consequence where teams are resting their starters, games where you got one really good team that they're fighting for seeding maybe, or are they going to win the division, but then they're playing a dumpster fire team. Just a lot of not great matchups this weekend. But we got this one great top tier matchup here, Sunday Night Football, my Minnesota Vikings and the Detroit Lions, for all the marbles. All the regular season marbles, they're all in the basket. Who's going to take them? It's going to be fun, man. Probably not going to be fun for me. I'm going to be stressed out the entire time, but it should be fun for America and worldwide football fans all over the globe. So that'll do it for this episode. Like I said, we'll be back full strength next week. I don't know how many episodes we're going to do because there's no point in breaking down most of these games. We'll do a pick show. I'm going to try and get some guests on the show, some fans of other playoff teams. We might run through, everyone pick the weekend's games and then, see what everyone's brackets are, and then have each person play out their bracket, who they think is going to win the Super Bowl. I might come up with some games maybe for us to play. Might do maybe a snake draft and pick the different teams that we like. And, each guy comes out with their group of teams, and whichever team wins the Super Bowl, whoever has that team in their group, they get a prize, which is a pat on the back, and absolutely definitely not a cash prize, but we'll make it fun. I'll be back for sure. I don't know if I could do Monday. I might not even be able to. If I'm going to try and do Monday, I'll try and do Monday. I'm going to be flying on Tuesday, maybe Tuesday night. Worst case scenario, I should be back in time to rip one of these out Tuesday night, and we'll take it from there. See how it goes, and see if we can come up with some fun new shit to do for the playoffs and get this thing back rolling at full strength. And you know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, tell me what I'm missing, what we should be talking about, what the national media Muppets should be talking about, but they're not talking about, as I well know when it comes to my Minnesota Vikings. Tell me what we should be talking about with your team, but only if your team is a playoff team because I don't care about those other teams right now. Sorry. When we get to the offseason, we will dive deep into all the bad teams and what they're going to do in the draft. So save it for then. But subscribe, comment, tell your friends, follow on Instagram at Footballheads Show with 2 S's. That's at Footballheads Show on Instagram. Come back next week. It's going to be real fun. And send positive vibes for my Minnesota Vikings. And until next time, as always, take it easy, football heads.